I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people who fished the harbour and rivers and grew their food on the flats and gentle hillsides of Melbourne. I'd like to bet that no one in this room knows that when Europeans first arrived here, that the hillsides were terraced as a result of thousands and thousands of years of cultivation. The creation of erosion control contours and moisture retention banks. The soil was cultivated so deeply and frequently that, in the words of one of the first farmers, it ran through your fingers like ashes. The same settler reported that within a year of grazing by sheep, the murnong, or yam daisy, had disappeared and the soil was packed hard and gutted by the erosion of runoff. I acknowledge the Bunurong because that is part of my heritage. It frustrates many Australians that when people as pale as I am identify as Aboriginal, that we are pulling the wool. I am more Cornish than Koori, but the circumstances of my life have made it impossible to ignore Aboriginal family. Australians also find it hard to understand the real economy of Aboriginal Australians, not because we are red-necked racist mongrels, but because in the rush for possession of the land, we had to turn our eye from the obvious signs of civilisation. The population reduction of Aboriginal Australians by guns, smallpox and starvation meant that by 1880 in Melbourne, most people saw few Aboriginal people and few signs of their industry. In dark emu, $38, and shortlisted in the... Don't snatch, sir, I've only got one here. I can't read back there. In dark emu, shortlisted by the Victorian Premier's Awards for 2014. There'll be enough of these for everyone who wants one. I've got 3. My aim in that book is to contest the myth that Aboriginal people were hunters and gatherers. Many Australians and many of our anthropologists were critical of my essays on this subject, and so I knew that if I was to convince them that I would have to rely on sources in which they had absolute faith. And those sources are the Australian explorers, revered as saints in the Australian canon. After leaving a meeting of those anthropologists where I'd been chastised for using the word agriculture in the same sentence as Aboriginal, I determined to go to the first bookshop I could find and buy the first Australian Explorers Journal. The one that I purchased was the Journal of Charles Sturt, the Australian explorer. And I read this not far into his journal. He was riding through the Australian desert near the Warburton River over one giant red sandhill after another. He was nearly blind. One of his companions' pool was already dead. The rest of the men had scurvy. The horses were so weak they could only walk in a straight line. They reached the top of one last sandhill and they were hailed by 400 Aboriginal people. "How you going?" They said. "No," they said. In language they said, "What are you doing? Come down here." Sturt said that they tipped over the edge of the dune, the horses plunged forward, they couldn't turn around. He said at that moment we were in the Aboriginal people's hands. We were at their mercy because we were hanging on to the horses' bridles. The horses were going in a straight line. We were being delivered to the mercy of Aboriginal people. And that's what they got, mercy. The Aboriginal people never seen a white man, never seen a horse. But they brought large coolamons of water up to the explorers, allowed them to drink. Then they turned to this beast, the horse they'd never seen, and held it out so the horse could drink, and the whiskers of the horse's muzzles touched their hands. The courage of those people was remarked on by Sturt. But what he next remarks on was the fact that the Aboriginal people brought roast duck and cake to feed them. They were given a house, a new house in a new development, which was built by Metricon, on the banks of the Warburton River. They were given kindling for their fire. Sturt remarks that the cakes that he ate that day were the lightest and most flavoursome he'd ever eaten. Now, a starving man might be encouraged to talk about anything like that. Sarah Adams' fruitcake, for instance. But he talks about it continuously because over the next 5 years, he is presented with this food time and time again. We don't know what the flour was. We don't know what grain those people were growing because they had sown the entire banks of the Warburton River with a grain. And such is our ignorance of Australian Aboriginal life, we don't know what that grain was. It's my ambition to find out what that was. Major Mitchell, in the next book of Explorers' Diaries that I read, rode through 9 miles of stooked grain in southern Queensland. The grain had been harvested by Aboriginal people with ewan knives and stooked into stooks. And he rode through 9 miles of this. This was a major occupation. And it brings me to a really important point about Australian history that we've never celebrated. Last year, some archaeologists in central Australia on the border of Queensland and New South Wales found a grinding stone which was 34,000 years old. They examined the stone because only scientists can report on Aboriginal matters. They examined the stone and found that it had been used to grind flour. 34,000 years old, those people were bakers. In fact, they were the world's first bakers because the next group of people to use grinding stones to make flour, to make bread, were the Egyptians 17,000 years ago. We should be delighted in this country that we are the land of the world's first bakers. This is going to get very, very difficult now because I'm a Luddite. That's a rock. Nah, that's Mount Goongerah. And these rocks are the eggs of the rainbow serpent. The rainbow serpent in my people's story is that it came right down Cape York, laid its eggs in the Australian Alps, and its head rests on Rottnest Island. That takes in the whole of southeastern, southwestern Australia. People to the north of there, and there's a language division indicated by that rainbow serpent, have a different story. But the rainbow serpent was everywhere. When people say that the earth is our mother and the rainbow serpent is also our mother, that's why. You're getting nervous? Because I am. I'm going to press it. That's Australia. This belt here is the Aboriginal grain belt. Norman Tyndale indicated the places in Australia where Aboriginal people had been growing grain. That is the West Australian wheat belt of today. Australian wheat. And down here. Nearly 3 to 4 times as great were the Australian agriculturalists, sowing grain, harvesting grain, grinding it into flour and storing it. These are all indications of people who are not hunters and gatherers. And we know that storage of grain existed because Ernest Giles, who made a living out of shooting Aboriginal people, another explorer, and was vitriolic about Aboriginal people, found several caches of grain that weighed over a tonne. That is not the work of hunters and gatherers, my fellow Australians. This is Mitchell grass growing in Queensland, just on the border. That is a memorial erected by Aboriginal people for people who died in a massacre on that ground. And there's a double irony there, site of a massacre, also site of the crop for which they were dispossessed. The anthropologists have various indicators of civilised peoples, and this is one of them. This is a Queensland house. Part of my family, the Pascoes, come from Lockhart River. The white side of my family had children with Lockhart River women, and in that area people built houses out of cane like that. This is not the image that I was taught in school about Aboriginal people. This is a drawing that Sir Thomas Mitchell made of a place called Melbourne. This is a cemetery with little paths in between each of the plots. It breaks my heart to see that. It is such a gorgeous representation of reverence for Aboriginal people. This is the flowering head of Murnong. That's a drawing of the plant of Murnong, which was grown wherever grain wasn't, in southeastern Australia. That's a harvest out of my garden last year of scabigiera. Oh, look at only $38. Now look, 35. Who said Aboriginal people don't have an economy? Sorry about that, can't count. Look, as I'm clearly the oldest person in the room, I've got to hurry now to get through what I'm talking about because I don't want to miss my nap, and I'm expecting a call from the hospice. Incidentally, this is the last time I'm going to wear this shirt before Christmas. But you're a bit quick off the mark there, all intelligent people, because I'd actually written the gag here, but there are children in the towns where I've lived who were in awe of me around this time of the year, and I allowed them to be in awe of me. But come December 26th, they found me profoundly disappointing. If there are any children in the audience, I also have free books. Free books. Yeah. And of course, $35. You've just done me out of $3. $35. It's on there. Thank you very much.